I love when a movie captures your attention from the poster alone. For me, it was this one. Alison Brie and Dave Franco's lower lips combined into one. We've all thought about it, so to finally see it realized in an image was something. Together follows a couple, Tim and Millie, played by real-life couple Franco and Brie. This couple has been drifting apart lately, but after a move to the countryside, they find themselves inexorably drawn together. Like, really together. Like, smushing into each other and fusing together. Can they fight it? Spoilers ahead to answer that question. The movie begins somewhere in the Washington state countryside. A search party combs the woods for a missing couple. None notice the strange hole in the ground with a church bell near the surface. None except the search dogs. The two of them find their way in, and they drink from the water. When the search dogs return to the surface, they're inseparable, staring at each other as though drawn together by some unseen force. And soon, that force succeeds. The dogs are melded together in a painful affront to nature, which happened to be my high school nickname. I love an opening that grabs your attention with something weird. Curiosity is a strong driving force to keep watching a movie, and starting at something bizarre is a great way to plant it. It also holds promise because there's so much tension in such a short amount of time. Thanks to the build-up, it isn't just a reveal, but an escalation of oddities. The two dogs don't fuse together right away. At first, they just lock eyes like they're hypnotized. Already weird to see. Two dogs together are usually either interacting or ignoring each other, but the still focus, just staring at each other, is unsettling. Once the combination happens, first we hear the strange sounds of the hybrid creature getting louder as a man approaches. We see his reaction, and then he raises the flashlight, and they are revealed for only a moment. But thanks to the magic of editing, we can freeze frame on it. Though as I'm writing this, I forget how gruesome it is, and if it's too gruesome, I'll have to censor it. So not really a useful freeze frame. Unless you sign up as a member for the uncensored version. Meet Tim and Millie, the happy couple. Are they happy though? Tim's great and all. Sure, in the last 10 years they've been together, his rock star dreams haven't panned out. He's a bit distant lately, but he's a great guy. And
aren't you worried about how long it's been since the two of you have,
he's even agreed to move out of the city to the countryside for Millie's new teaching job. Big move, and Millie has an even bigger one in mind too. At the going away party, she gets on one knee and mimes presenting a wedding ring. Tim says yes, but the hesitation and confusion that came first are enough to chill the mood. To be fair, it might have been a little confusing. With no actual ring, it looks weird, like Scarlet Witch trying to cast a spell. I love the performances in this movie. Franco's almost hesitant demeanor in every line of dialogue suits his character as the codependent one. Brie does a great job striking a balance between loving and caring with a doubtful underbelly because Millie is worried the love is gone, especially after that near miss of a proposal. The sequence sets up a theme of codependency and anxieties around losing yourself in a relationship.
When you started dating my sister, I thought you might make her cooler. Instead, she's just made you. When I die, I don't want someone else's life flashing before my eyes.
The idea is theoretically captured well in that clever snipe and becomes more tangible when his friends mention they need a guitarist for the upcoming tour. Tim has rock star dreams, and he'd love to do that tour, except they're moving. Now he has to sacrifice something real and imminent for Millie. You know what? Screw it. He'll do that tour. They're not even moving that far anyway.
It's not even that far.
And it's so fucking far.
This opening also establishes the movie's sense of humor, a natural fit for writer-director Michael Shanks, who actually got his start with funny YouTube videos on his channel Tim Tim Fed. That night in bed, they do what all loving couples do in bed. Have an awkward conversation about their future. She's worried the love is gone. Maybe now they're just used to each other. He reassures her, and that helps. When she tries to initiate more and he retreats, must be the alcohol, that helps less. She turns to sleep before tossing some word grenades over her shoulder. Everyone knows you need me more than I need you. We laugh about it. Resenting me doesn't make you less of a failure. And then...
Can you ask them to leave?
Oh.
I can't sleep with them staring at
us.
Tim looks across the room to find their bed has stretched, and on the other side of it, staring back at him, a strange woman. As he lowers himself under the blanket, she's there too. Great scare. I love when instead of the monster just jumping out, first there's a moment of confusion. Can you ask them to leave? What is she talking about? The question throws you, so you're primed to be extra freaked out at the actual reveal. Bonus points too, because the way she's crawling toward him as he's pulling the blanket up is a nice trick that so violates the pact we have with ghosts. You do not cross the blanket barrier. It also serves a story purpose, forcing Tim to confront his anxieties and setting up that something traumatic is haunting him, something we'll learn about later. Spoilers, that strange woman in the bed is actually his mom. The next morning, they unpack their things, including a saw, what I believe you'd call a reciprocating saw, and Tim smells something weird. Above a light fixture, he finds the source, a bunch of dead rats. Well, mostly dead.
Oh.
At school, Millie befriends a fellow teacher who happens to also be their neighbor in the new town, Jamie, played by Damon Harriman, who I know mainly as Dewey Crow from Justified. Maybe that's why I immediately don't trust him. I love the way these characters' anxieties keep slipping out in the dialogue. Millie talks about her partner Tim. Jamie asks if she's explored much. Awkwardly, she thinks he's asking if she's explored much in terms of partners, and he clarifies he just meant explored around town. It tells you where Millie's head is at. That night, she asks Tim to join her in bed, but he has to stay up late and practice for this Thursday's rehearsal. But tomorrow, they can go on that hike she was telling him about. The next day, as they make their way into the woods, we cut to a bird's eye view, something Shanks has been trying to do with all his previous works. In his interview with Slant Magazine, he talks about the importance of storyboarding and over-preparing, so it's easier to condense when you don't have the time or money to shoot everything. You know which shots you need and which ones you don't need. Talking about Together, he said this: "In every production I've ever been a part of, I've always storyboarded bird's eye top-down shots. I'd never been able to film one before because they're always the first to go. In this film, I got 6 in." It's a cool shot, and I think it works because it looks so different from anything we'd seen previously in the movie. You can't help but notice it and feel a change in the story. It gives the woods a feeling of power because they caused that shift. I also can't help but notice how small the characters look in comparison to the trees, creating a sense of powerlessness against the natural force they're about to confront. A lot of that probably doesn't consciously translate other than a general ominous vibe, which is enough. In the woods, Tim spots a little bell, which leads to another bell. Millie wonders if they should turn around, but Tim insists on pressing ahead.
We can always turn back. It's so nice out.
Okay, wait, I think it's this way.
Lost in the woods and rain, Tim falls into that strange hole in the ground, and when Millie tries to rescue him, she falls too. But at least his phone is okay.
I'm fine, by the way.
Hey, sorry, you okay?
A lot of the humor comes from the characters' incompetence in handling their situation. When they get lost, Tim finds north using his phone's compass, and she's like, "Okay, what do we do with that? I don't know, I thought it would be helpful." And I think those of you willing to be honest will admit you can relate. That's how Shanks approached the script, telling Slate Magazine, "I was just trying to be honest as to what I would be like in these situations, and I would be incompetent, sloppy, and awkward. Writing the truth of who these characters were leaned into my background as a sketch comedy filmmaker." Though initial drafts apparently made Tim worse. Franco worked with Shanks to adjust the character before shooting. Franco told Moviefone, Michael Shanks very loosely based the relationship in the movie on his own 16-year relationship. And he kind of made my character, which is a version of him, the worst version of him. He was like, "This is how I fear people are looking at me. This is just all my darkest places in my head." I was like, I get that, but on the page, this guy is an asshole, and no one will be rooting for this guy. So it was truly minor character adjustments, just making sure that his assholeness was kind of coming from a relatable place of just being a tortured guy. My only reaction to all this is, Moviefone is still around?
Hello, and welcome to Moviefone.
Stuck in that cave for the night, they get thirsty. Luckily, Tim spots a small pool of perfectly fine water. They both have some, then settle in for the night. She asks him about the rats the other day, so he tells her a story. When he was a kid, his dad smelled something strange in his room and demanded he clean it. He did, but the smell was still there, so he cleaned it again. Finally, his dad tore the room apart and found a dead rat above the light. It had nested there, and Tim was cooking it every time he used that light. But it was gradual, so he never noticed the smell. That's what he was breathing in every day without knowing it. Death. He'd forgotten all about that until he smelled it again when he found them, his parents. He opened the door to find his mom smiling at him next to the corpse of his father. Her mind snapped when she woke up next to him and couldn't process it.
Still going to bed each night next to that face and the horrible smell.
That's the memory which haunted him earlier in that nightmare. People often talk about the importance of show, don't tell, but with the right words, you can show by telling. In the same way some people in real life are great at telling stories. Part of that comes from making the descriptions visceral. For example, Tim talks about a smell so thick you can taste it. That isn't telling instead of showing, it's showing through words. And it does help Tim come across as tortured, which is good because otherwise it would be harder to sympathize with a character when the movie paints almost everything as his fault. Millie wanted to turn around. Tim insisted they keep going. Tim fell in the cave. Tim decides to drink the water that sets off the curse. At the same time, Millie is complicit in everything. She could have put her foot down about going home, and no one forced her to drink the water. Speaking of show don't tell, I love what Shanks did with the cave. It's so weird. He mentioned Aliens and H.R. Giger as an influence on the design. Getting ahead a bit, later on we learned there was a church built here that collapsed. And in his interview with Out Magazine, he expands on the idea. That cave is a living entity in a way. I sort of thought of it as this primordial giant gut of the earth that is slowly digesting everything around it. So in my head, it was the idea that the church above this pit was built kind of 20 years before we arrive at the film, and just slowly but surely, it is kind of swallowing it. And that's why by the time we get there, we have pews and sort of like weatherboards, elements of the church like in the walls of the cave. But right up the top, the bell is still there because it was the highest point of the church. When they wake in the morning, their legs are stuck together. It's a little painful, but they're able to pull apart and escape the cave. Back home, Millie asks for a shoulder rub, and while Tim works her back, it's like he goes into a trance. He gets a little too rough, like he's trying to push his hands into her, almost like he's trying to turn her into a human dummy, like in Killer Clowns from Outer Space or Dead Silence. A hint perhaps at upcoming videos? Yes. After that, she drives into town while he takes a shower. Suddenly, he once again goes into a trance, as though connected to Millie's movements. When she turns left, his body is flung left. And when she keeps driving forward, it's like his body is trying to push itself through the wall, hard enough to make him bleed. Shanks returns to the bird's eye view in this sequence, and it's used in a really clever way. He's trying to communicate a complicated idea, that Tim's body is unconsciously following Millie's movements. Using the bird's eye view and rotating the camera based on her movements makes the complicated idea really easy to understand. At certain points, we'll see Millie stuck following Tim, but I think it makes sense to start with Tim as the one on a leash. The movie is dealing in part with the idea of codependency, losing yourself in a relationship and becoming, to an unhealthy degree, overly reliant on your partner. The movie presents that in a grounded way. Tim has uprooted his life for Millie, joining her in this move for her teaching job, then lifts that idea from reality to metaphor, so when the horror elements arrive, they aren't just scary, but also carry the weight of that idea. Watching Tim flung around his shower like he's on an invisible leash turns the idea of codependence into a visual, and it feels dangerous because he's in the shower, hard and slippery surface, and due to his state of undress, he feels extra vulnerable. Tim sees a doctor, but the doctor has no answers for him, other than the suggestion it was an anxiety or panic attack, like ones he's had before, and he prescribes a muscle relaxant. It slows the central nervous system down, so even if his brain starts panicking, his body will relax, shutting down the feedback loop. And he drops this nugget.
You know, you two were lucky. It was that couple that went missing out there.
That's the couple we heard about in the cold open, and Tim learns more about them via Google. Soon, a knock at the door. Jamie, there to welcome them to the neighborhood. Over a drink, Tim asks about that cave, the giant bell, the church pews in the wall. Jamie tells him there was a chapel out there which collapsed years ago, part of a New Age hippy-dippy group. The scene gets uncomfortable when the masks slip for a moment. Tim and Millie play the happy couple until she talks about not learning how to cook. It's Tim's fault, he's so good at it, she's never had to learn. It strikes a nerve in Tim. He says how it's a good deal. She gets a personal cook, and I'm trapped here. Living in the city, he never bothered to get a driver's license. They're far enough from the train station, he's completely dependent on her for transportation. He could leave, but only when she's available to give him a ride. Though Jamie offers an oddly optimistic take. Well, it sounds to me like you complete each other. After Jamie leaves, the magnetism is back. Tim is flung into a brief makeout session that ends with their lips briefly stuck together like they're glued.
Ow! Did you just bite me?
Just like in the poster, and it's just as beautiful as I imagined. That night, Millie wakes up to something pulling her hair. Oh my god! Oh, never mind, it's just Tim swallowing and choking on her hair. I hate when that happens. Once she startles him awake, they're able to yank it out. Shanks is good at the scares, which start small and build, which are so much more effective than just jump scares. She feels something on her hair in the middle of the night. Tim must have accidentally rolled onto it. Then she hears a weird noise. That's unsettling. She turns to see Tim's eyes wide open in the dark, but can't see much more than that. Waking up to find someone staring at you is creepy, as I established, or will establish if it hasn't come out yet in my Paranormal Activity review. Then the reveal. Tim is swallowing her hair. Shocking for her, and then the double whammy when you put yourself in his shoes. How gross, painful, and weird would it be to wake up with a rope's worth of hair down your esophagus? It's also another example of Shanks exaggerating real experience to horrific effect, like finding your partner's hair in strange places, like the next day when Tim finds a leftover strand stuck between his teeth. The effect, by the way, was achieved through a photorealistic Dave Franco prosthetic, essentially a puppet of his head they could pull the hair through. It had a tube down the bottom they could blow into so his throat would swell like he's swallowing. It's an amazing prosthetic that looks so real and is only on screen for about 1.5 seconds. Finally, Thursday arrives, the day of Tim's first rehearsal with the band. Millie drops him off at the train station and heads to school. Once they're separated, it's like in the shower all over again. Tim feels his body panicking. He takes a pill, that muscle relaxant, but it's still there, the force drawing him to Millie. So, he stops fighting it. That's why soon Millie spots him outside her classroom window, which is only the second weird thing she's seen today. The other is the drawing her student did of her dogs, the ones we saw fused together in the cold open, now presumably euthanized. Once Tim gets to Millie, they do the only natural thing, make love in a stall in the boys' bathroom. Only once they're done, Tim is stuck inside her, like he dipped his member in superglue before they went at it. Especially awkward when they notice a kid is standing outside the stall. When that kid runs for the teacher, they have no choice. Millie pulls away hard enough to get Tim out. After that, an awkward chat with Jamie, who definitely notices there was someone in the stall with her. For a moment, you see Franco's member as they try to yank it out. If you're curious, it's not the real thing. How'd they pull it off? They had a limited prosthetics budget, so Shanks had to get creative. He told Out Magazine, "It just so happened that my partner at the time was the lead designer of a sex toy company, and she was like, oh, I've got a bunch of very realistic genitals just lying around in a drawer in my home office. So I just took one of those and gave it to the prosthetics guy, and he kind of painted it up. It became maybe my favorite shot in the film." Back home, Tim and Millie argue before she heads off to Jamie's for damage control. She apologizes again, but he quickly notices something is wrong and invites her in. She opens up about her worries. Do Tim and her have love or just complacency? Jamie suggests maybe complacency is another word for harmony, and he tells her what he teaches his 9th grade history class. Plato wrote that the ancient Greeks believed we were created with 4 arms, 4 legs, and a head with 2 faces. But Zeus feared our power, so he split us into 2 separate parts, dooming us to spend our lives in search of the other half.
If you think you've found that, don't be so quick to let it go.
He opens up about his own partner. He had the same doubts as Millie, and he did leave his partner until he realized how lost he was without him. She offers words of condolence, I bet you miss him, and notes the 2 rings on his finger. He asks if she wants to see his wedding tape, but she's forced to excuse herself when she notices Tim standing outside again. He just couldn't stay away. So she heads out and takes him home. That night, Tim broods over a laptop filled with messages from his would-be bandmates, angry that he missed their first practice today, and he looks at the social media page of the missing couple. The guy, by the way, Simon, is played by Michael Shanks in a little director cameo. Inspecting the image reveals it was taken near that cave. He even spots one of those small bells in the photo. Fact check, yes, many images include GPS coordinates in their metadata, but on a website like Facebook, that metadata would be scrubbed. To be fair, the social media site Tim browses is completely unbranded, so although it looks like Facebook, I guess in the world of Together, people use some other social media site with even worse privacy controls. I think they could have skipped the metadata thing and instead just showed the little bell, which more realistically gets the same idea across. His internet sleuthing is interrupted by his sleeping girlfriend smashing against the glass door to his office. She presses against that door, following his movements like a magnet, even floating when he stands up higher on his toes. When he opens the door, her body tackles into his, until he slaps her to snap her awake. After that, they talk. He thinks something happened to them in that cave, same as whatever happened to the missing couple. She's skeptical, or maybe she just doesn't want to believe, even though she can feel the same pull and thirst in her bones. He tells her they have to go back to that cave for answers. She's not interested in that. In fact, she doesn't want him here on Sunday when her parents visit. Maybe she doesn't want him at all. When she leaves the room, it took me a minute to realize what was happening on the table. There's what looks like a crack in the wood and some blood. Then I realized, no, Millie was bleeding earlier from pressing hard against the glass. Some of that blood was left on the table, and now that blood is drawn to Tim. As the blood crawls across the table, it leaves a trail behind. That night, they sleep in separate rooms, until they wake up to their bodies skidding across the floor toward each other until their hands and arms start to fuse. They pull away as hard as they can. They fight it. Tim gets a better idea how. The muscle relaxants. They swallow and snort to get those pills into their system fast. Soon, Tim passes out. He wakes up tied to a chair and takes a second to process what Millie is up to. She has Chekhov's saw in her hand, one she promptly uses to cut through the flesh that's fused their arms together. I love the disorienting transition into the scene. Tim wakes up at Millie's mercy, which shows the darker side to codependency. It can be freeing to rely on someone else, but when it goes too far, you're at their mercy. For a minute, it gives Misery vibes, because she's trying to be nice, but she sounds insane. Don't worry, it'll be okay. Here, have some more whiskey while I mutilate you. Thankfully, it's cut by humor, like Millie realizing the whiskey is hitting her too. Maybe not the best idea when she's about to perform impromptu surgery with a power tool, or right before she starts cutting.
By the way, I'm sorry I didn't believe you before. You were right, obviously.
Babe, just go!
Body horror is one of the more disturbing subgenres, so humor definitely helps it go down easier. It's also just a bizarre scenario, ripe with comedic potential, so it would have been a shame not to exploit that opportunity. You also have to appreciate the effects in these scenes, especially the details of their fingers struggling under the fusing flesh. That's where I can almost imagine how it feels, like trying to get your hand through a sleeve, but it's too small. And the sleeve is made of flesh. And there's someone else's arm in there. Shanks mentions The Thing as one of his influences, and you can definitely see it in the reshaping of flesh like clay. Pretty much all the effects, by the way, have a real physical prosthetic basis that's then enhanced by visual effects. The big VFX were done by the studio's Rise and Frame store, but about 130 shots were done by Shanks himself in After Effects. He mentioned that the ones he handled were mostly things like throughout the day there'd be wear and tear on the prosthetics, so he'd smooth out areas where you can spot the cracks and stuff. The actual prosthetic designs were led by Larry Van Donovan, who also did prosthetic fabrication for Furiosa, The Invisible Man, and Thor Ragnarok. You also have to give Franco and Brie some credit. Once the prosthetic was applied, you couldn't take it off without destroying it. So they would be stuck with each other all day. They'd have to go to the bathroom together. So things were definitely made easier by having co-leads who were an actual couple and already very comfortable with each other. What to do next? Millie wants to go to the hospital while Tim knows doctors can't fix this. They have to go back to the cave. But she makes a compelling argument.
I just saw it through our fucking arms! We are going to the hospital!
Except she forgot her keys at Jamie's house. So she heads that way, and the moment she's gone, Tim heads for the cave. Ultimately, both their paths lead to the truth. At Jamie's, Millie sees he's left his wedding tape playing. He and his husband were part of that hippy-dippy church. A church that took the celebration of union quite literally. Yes, he wears 2 rings because he is 2 people fused into one. Jamie shows himself. He tells Millie how wonderful this is, how lucky she is to become one of the few who get to become whole. The connection is deeper than anything you could ever imagine. No more walls. Share fears and memories. What awaits is the ultimate intimacy in divine flesh. This is the hardest part. They just need to push through. And anyway, she wouldn't like the alternative. To force the process along, he cuts her arm open. Instinctively, she slaps his face, and it comes apart like clay before starting to fuse back together. In the cave, Tim notices a painting depicting the practice, and he finds that missing couple in the midst of a fusion gone wrong. Apparently, it doesn't work too well when one of the two is killed during the fusion process. The knife in the man's neck says that either she tried to kill him or perhaps he took his own life in hopes of sparing her the painful process. Tim takes that knife and runs while the creature begs for help. This is sort of another director cameo, by the way, because they did create a prosthetic mold of Shanks to be part of the 2-headed monstrosity. It's a little tropey to have the guy walk in at the end of a horror movie to explain everything, but it works pretty well here. The twist that Jamie is involved in what's happening to them doesn't come out of nowhere. He told the story about Zeus. Multiple times, he makes comments implying a deep respect for the idea of 2 people coming together. He definitely saw Tim was in the bathroom with Millie at the school and didn't say anything. That's weird, but less weird if he knows what they're going through and knows they're battling a force that's near impossible to resist. When Millie visits his house, she doesn't push a button to ring the doorbell. She rings an actual bell. We don't see it, but we see her reach off screen and make the motions of pulling a rope. Later, we see it's just like those church bells. Inside his house, she sees a picture of him with his partner, and Jamie now is clearly an amalgamation of the 2 people in that photo. One looks a lot like him, the other has glasses. So it looks like the hybrid kept a lot of his face while inheriting his husband's poor eyesight. So it's the kind of twist that's earned by hiding in plain sight. And he isn't giving a pointless villain monologue, he's giving more of a pitch. He knows what she's going through. He knows it can't be resisted, and he's hoping to convince her it shouldn't be resisted. Tim runs home and finds Millie. He knows how to save her. He'll take his own life before the fusion can take place. She reveals he doesn't have to do that. It doesn't make any sense until Tim looks down and sees the line of blood crawling toward him across the pavement. The line of blood that starts at the open wound on her arm. He doesn't have to die because any second she'll be dead anyway. Millie closes her eyes, expecting never to open them again, except she does. Tim saved her life the only way he could, by fusing his arm to hers and sealing the wound. Finally, they decide to complete the ritual without resisting it. He puts on a song from her favorite band, Two Become One by the Spice Girls. They get close, shed their clothes, and let their bodies join in divine flesh. When Millie's parents arrive for dinner on Sunday, they're greeted at the door not by Tim or Millie, but by Tilly.
Hey.
Tilly is the name they came up with on set for this amalgamation of the two characters. They achieved the look through a combination of prosthetics and digital composition. The base of the character is Alison Brie standing in Dave Franco's clothes with shoulder pads. For the face, she's wearing a wig and eyebrows to look like Franco's. Then they used digital effects to graft on his nose, Adam's apple, and eyes. So is this a happy ending? Right before Millie closes her eyes and prepares to die, both profess their love for each other. It's cathartic to see them finally admit it. Tim remembers how lost he was before he met Millie. Despite all the fears and anxieties of losing himself, he loves her and wants to be with her. She feels the same way. In the grand finale, when they finally combine, they aren't fighting it. They're accepting the beauty of two becoming one. And there are some selling points. How often are we tortured by something inside us? Fears, traumatic memories, and stress? To unburden yourself by sharing those feelings with someone else is enticing. Shanks shows us what that looks like in the real world. Tim suffered the trauma of finding his mother next to his father's corpse. Telling Millie about it allows her to shoulder some of the burden with him. Of course, in the end, it becomes literal, which, let's be honest, no matter how much you focus on those selling points, the idea of melding with another person and losing your individuality is weird. I don't want to do it. I'd rather share my burdens the old-fashioned way. Talking. Maybe a hug here and there. Like any story, we all take something different away from it, and that's what I take away. The movie is all about exploring the anxieties that come with relationships, especially ones that involve a degree of codependency that borders on toxic. Anxieties tend to inflate problems to seem way worse than they really are. If you're afraid of losing yourself, then this ending represents that fear inflated to the point that it becomes literal. So in a way, it's soothing. If you are afraid of losing yourself, think of this ending and you'll see, well, it could be worse. I haven't literally hybridized with another human, and I don't need a buzzsaw to reclaim some independence. I'm also glad they showed us Tilly at the end. It feels like a necessary punchline after all the setup. It's a memorable ending and satisfies the curiosity when you see the finished product of their melding. If you have questions about the movie's lore, obviously the story doesn't expand much on the how or why behind everything, other than hinting that some people found a mysterious puddle that causes organisms to fuse, and then they formed a hippy-dippy church group around it. Shanks expanded a little further in that Out magazine interview, talking about some Lovecraftian influence. The subterranean pit is definitely this sort of supernatural elder god style thing. I don't want to overly explain this. I just feel like this is something from the deep, distant past. Something raw in the deep center of the earth. I feel like it's almost like a pustule from within the Earth's core that's just kind of bursted forth at some point in the distant past. And over the course of things, people have discovered it. And maybe there's other pools of water just like that from the same water source across the world. Lovecraft was definitely in my mind for that whole thing. As far as featured directorial debuts, I think Shanks knocked it out of the park with this movie. He does a great job building tension and using horror to explore very real, grounded, and relatable fears. I'm eagerly awaiting and slightly dreading to see whatever it is he does next. One Take's Month of Terror continues tomorrow with Killer Clowns from Outer Space.